What if I told you that a first-time actor with 0 professional acting credits just carried a movie past Oppenheimer, past Bohemian Rhapsody, and into a billion-dollar box office club that no biopic has ever entered before? No stunt double moments. No franchise built-in fan base. Just a 20-something newcomer stepping into the shoes of his own uncle and somehow making the whole world believe they were watching Michael Jackson walk again. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how an unknown actor in a critically savaged film turned into the single biggest financial event in biopic history. If you love deep dives into Michael Jackson's legacy and the business behind the biggest movies on the planet, hit subscribe right now, because there's a lot more of this coming. Now let's get into it. Before Michael even had a release date, the casting news alone broke the internet. Jaafar Jackson, Michael's real-life nephew, son of Jermaine Jackson, was announced as the lead. He had never appeared in a film before. He had never carried a single scene in front of a camera. And now he was being asked to play arguably the most scrutinized entertainer who ever lived. Skeptics were everywhere. Casting directors don't usually hand the role of a global icon to someone with no resume. But the studio had seen something in early screen tests that convinced them this wasn't a gamble. It was a discovery. And then the trailers dropped. The internet lost its mind. Side-by-side comparisons of Jaafar's movements against archival Michael Jackson footage went viral within hours. The moonwalk looked identical. The vocal inflections in interview scenes landed the same way. People weren't just impressed, they were unsettled in the best possible way, because it genuinely looked like Michael Jackson had been brought back for 2.5 hours. That online buzz became free marketing worth millions, and it primed audiences to show up opening weekend already believing they were about to see something historic. When Michael opened on April 24th, 2026, analysts inside the studio were bracing for a modest $65 to $70 million domestic weekend. That's a perfectly respectable number for a music biopic. Instead, the film pulled in $97. $2 million domestically from just under 4,000 theaters, and combined with its overseas debut, it landed a worldwide opening of roughly $218 million. That single weekend obliterated the previous music biopic opening record, held by Straight Outta Compton, which opened to $60 million back in 2015. Michael didn't just beat that record, it nearly doubled it. From there, the film refused to slow down. Week after week, it kept pulling in audiences well past the usual drop-off point for a 2.5-hour drama. By June 14th, it had crossed $911 million worldwide, enough to pass Bohemian Rhapsody's decade-long reign as the highest-grossing music biopic ever made. Then, just 2 weeks later on June 28th, it did something even bigger. Michael passed Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, which had earned $975 million, to become the highest-grossing biopic of any kind in the history of cinema. Not just music biopics, every biopic ever made. By early July, the film was sitting at roughly $991 million worldwide, just $372 million of that coming domestically, and a massive $620 million coming from international markets. And with its theatrical run still active in Japan, a country with an enormous devoted Michael Jackson fan base, the billion-dollar finish line was basically guaranteed. It got there. Michael officially crossed $1 billion at the global box office, becoming the very first biopic in the history of the medium to do it. A rocky road to the screen. Here's something most casual viewers don't know. This movie almost didn't come out looking anything like what audiences eventually saw. The production ran into a serious legal snag involving a past settlement agreement tied to one of the individuals who had accused Michael Jackson of abuse decades earlier. That agreement restricted how certain events could be depicted on screen, which forced Lionsgate into a costly and time-consuming round of reshoots. Those reshoots pushed the film's original release date back by nearly a full year. Behind the scenes, there was reportedly plenty of tension about the direction the story should take. In the end, the studio leaned into a more celebratory, crowd-pleasing tone that focused heavily on Michael's artistry, his relentless work ethic, and his rise from a child performer in Gary, Indiana, to the most famous entertainer on the planet. That decision is exactly what split critics and audiences so dramatically. Let's not sugarcoat this part. Professional critics were brutal. Michael currently sits at just 38% on Rotten Tomatoes. Reviewers repeatedly used words like sanitized and incomplete, pointing directly at the film's decision to leave out the child sexual abuse allegations that shadowed the back half of Jackson's life and career. But here's the disconnect that made this whole story so fascinating. On that exact same review platform, audiences gave the film a 97% approval score. Regular moviegoers walked out of theaters and rated it near perfect, while professional critics rated it barely passing. That's one of the widest critic versus audience gaps of the entire decade, and when a gap gets that wide, box office history shows the audience almost always wins. Word of mouth did the rest of the work. People weren't just watching Michael once. Repeat viewings became common, especially among longtime fans who wanted to experience the concert recreation sequences on the big screen more than once. That kind of repeat business is exactly what turns a strong opening into a billion-dollar run. Once Michael crossed the billion mark, the milestones kept piling up. It became Lionsgate's highest-grossing release of all time, surpassing The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, which had held that record since 2013 with $865 million. It became the biggest biopic ever released in France, dethroning the beloved Edith Piaf film La Vie en Rose. It out-earned the entire lifetime theatrical run of Bohemian Rhapsody in more than 40 different countries, with especially massive numbers coming out of Brazil, France, and Mexico. By the summer, Michael had become the second highest grossing film of all of 2026, trailing only the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which had already crossed the billion-dollar mark earlier in the year. Disney's Toy Story 5 was closing in on the milestone as well, meaning 2026 was shaping up to be a year with multiple billion-dollar films, but Michael remained the only one that wasn't animated and the only one built entirely around a true story. So why did a movie that critics tore apart end up making more money than any biopic in history? A few forces came together at exactly the right time. First, Michael Jackson's global fan base is simply unmatched. Over $620 million of this film's total came from outside the United States. His music has always transcended language, and that same universal appeal translated directly into ticket sales in markets where American biopics rarely perform this well. Second, Jaafar Jackson's casting turned out to be the emotional engine of the entire film. Watching Michael's actual blood relative recreate his uncle's most iconic performances gave audiences something no amount of visual effects or makeup could replicate, a genuine, uncanny sense of authenticity. Third, the film became a cultural event rather than just a movie release. Fans dressed up. Younger audiences who had only ever known Michael Jackson through streaming playlists and viral TikTok clips finally got to experience his artistry the way older generations did on a massive screen with concert-level sound. Fourth, the controversy surrounding what the film left out arguably fueled curiosity rather than killing it. People wanted to see for themselves how the story was told, and that curiosity translated directly into ticket sales, even among viewers who went in already knowing critics were unhappy with the final product. One market deserves its own spotlight here, and that's Japan. Michael Jackson has held a uniquely devoted fan base there for decades. Back in 2009, the concert documentary Michael Jackson's This Is It earned an astonishing $57 million in Japan alone, a number most feature films never touch in that market, no matter where they're from. So when Michael rolled out its Japanese release later in its run, insiders weren't surprised it became the tipping point that pushed the film comfortably past the billion-dollar line. Distribution partner Kino Films, working alongside Lionsgate's international arrangement, leaned heavily into that built-in loyalty, and the result was exactly what everyone expected. A market that has consistently proven it will show up for Michael Jackson content in a way few other territories can match. The ripple effects of this box office run are already spreading well beyond theaters. Streaming numbers for Michael Jackson's catalog reportedly nearly doubled in the days following the film's wide release, which matters enormously for Sony Music, given its massive stake in Jackson's song catalog, a deal reportedly valuing his rights at up to $5 billion. That means Michael's box office triumph is already paying dividends far beyond ticket sales alone, feeding directly back into streaming revenue and renewed interest in his entire back catalog. Lionsgate is already reportedly greenlighting at least one additional film to continue telling later chapters of his story, meaning this billion-dollar milestone might just be the opening chapter of a much bigger franchise. Interestingly, reports suggest Antoine Fuqua may not return to direct that follow-up, as he's reportedly moving on to a separate biopic project about the ancient Carthaginian general Hannibal for Netflix. Whoever ends up in the director's chair for the sequel inherits an enormous challenge, following up the highest-grossing biopic ever made, while presumably tackling the more difficult, more controversial chapters of Jackson's later life that this first film deliberately avoided. That's a considerably harder needle to thread, and how the studio handles it could determine whether this becomes a genuinely respected two-part portrait of a complicated icon, or whether the goodwill built by this first film starts to erode once audiences expect a deeper, less celebratory look at the man behind the music. With the billion-dollar milestone now secured, attention inside Lionsgate is reportedly shifting toward awards season. It's worth remembering that Bohemian Rhapsody, despite facing similarly harsh criticism for glossing over difficult chapters of Freddie Mercury's life, still went on to earn multiple Oscar nominations, including one for Best Picture. If history repeats itself, Michael and Jaafar Jackson's debut performance could be looking at a very similar awards trajectory later this year, regardless of what critics currently think of the finished film. So there it is, an unknown actor with no acting history, a film that critics wanted to bury, a production that nearly didn't survive its own legal battles, And somehow, all of it combined into the first billion-dollar biopic the world has ever seen. Whatever you think about the choices this film made in telling Michael Jackson's story, there's no denying the numbers. A legend who's been gone since 2009 just broke box office history all over again through the eyes of his own family. So tell me, did you see Michael in theaters? And if you did, were you one of the audiences who loved it despite what critics said, or did you walk out agreeing more with the reviewers this time? Drop your take in the comments below. I genuinely read every single one, and I always reply to the takes I disagree with. And if you want more breakdowns like this on the biggest entertainment stories happening right now, make sure you're subscribed, because there's so much more coming, and trust me, this particular story is far from finished.